Lin Dong felt slightly embarrassed as he looked at the cold, aloof woman in front of him. With a helpless gesture, he explained, I just ran into several illusions created by this space. They were all people I know, and then, Ling Qingzhu glanced at Lin Dong, giving a small nod of acknowledgement without showing any sign of dwelling on the matter. You didn't encounter any? Lin Dong asked, puzzled by her reaction. His brow furrowed slightly as he continued. He had been extremely frustrated by the illusions earlier. Although they hadn't harmed him, the feeling of being attacked by familiar faces was deeply unsettling. You're overthinking it. Ling Qingzhu's gaze took on a faintly peculiar glint as she spoke with her usual calm voice. What? Lin Dong was momentarily stunned by her sudden, cryptic words. Seeing his confusion, Ling Qingzhu raised her brows slightly and said, It's been years since we last met. How is it that you seem less sharp than before? There's clearly a formation in this ancient vault of heaven burning, and we're all trapped in it. I don't know what kind of formation it is, but many of the things here don't naturally exist. They're born from our thoughts. It's a profound mix of reality and illusion. Lin Dong's brow gradually tightened as he began to understand. He wasn't foolish, and as he listened to Ling Qingzhu's explanation, things started falling into place. Are you saying that those illusions appeared because I was overthinking things? He asked. Ling Qingzhu nodded. Calm your mind, and the illusions will dissolve on their own. You're seeing them because you're overcomplicating matters in your mind. Lin Dong was at a loss for words. He hadn't expected that the source of all that trouble was his own overthinking. Now that he looked back, the first illusion had appeared precisely when he was worrying about Qing Tan and the others. What an eerie formation. I didn't think it could reach this level, Lin Dong muttered. Though Ling Qingzhu made it sound simple, how many people could truly achieve a heart as still as water? Even someone like Lin Dong had stumbled into this trap. How could others hope to fare any better? After all, not everyone possessed Ling Qingzhu's cold, ice-like temperament. The illusions are just one layer of this formation. This space is also filled with a strange, restless energy. Once it enters the body, it clouds the mind, driving people to lose control and go mad, Ling Qingzhu explained. At this point, she glanced curiously at Lin Dong, noticing that he seemed unaffected by the restless energy. Lin Dong merely shrugged in response. Thanks to the devouring ancestral talisman protecting him, any restless energy entering his body was swiftly devoured, leaving him unaffected. So, is the place we're in an illusion or reality? Lin Dong lightly stomped the crimson ground beneath his feet, kicking up a trail of dust as he spoke. That's the strange part about this formation. It makes it impossible to distinguish between real and illusion. Ling Qingzhu shook her head. She had wandered around this space for a while but hadn't yet found a way out. No matter the formation, there must always be a central hub. If we can find it, we should be able to break the formation, Lin Dong said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he gazed ahead. This space is distorted. How can you find the hub? Ling Qingzhu frowned. She was aware of this as well, but wandering aimlessly through this twisted space could trap them indefinitely. I think I can manage. If you trust me, you can come along. Meeting here is a bit of fate, after all. Lin Dong smiled, then took the lead, striding toward the distance. Though the formation had masked the space's layout, the stone talisman within him allowed him to faintly sense a subtle, distant disturbance. Ling Qingzhu hesitated briefly, watching Lin Dong's back before following. The space was indeed strange, and if there was a chance to escape, she didn't want to miss it. Still, following Lin Dong felt a bit awkward for her. The two walked across the crimson land in silence, exchanging few words. Their relationship was rather complicated, making it difficult to treat each other as mere acquaintances. This quiet, slightly tense atmosphere lingered between them for nearly half an hour. Lin Dong led the way, relying on the stone talisman to guide him through the strange space's faint disturbances. Ling Qingzhu trailed silently behind him, her gaze occasionally flickering toward the thin figure ahead. In 5 years, he had changed a lot. How is Lin Langtian now? After a long period of silence, Ling Qingzhu suddenly broke the quiet. Lin Dong's steps faltered briefly. He turned his head with a faint smile and asked, Why ask about him? Ling Qingzhu didn't reply, simply staring at him with clear eyes. She had recalled 5 years ago, in the ancient tomb of the great Yin dynasty, the aloof and indifferent way Lin Langtian had looked down upon Lin Dong. Back then, Lin Langtian likely hadn't imagined that the weak young man he scorned would reach such heights in 5 years. He joined me in the 100 Dynasty War, but I killed him atop 100 Dynasties mountain, Lin Dong said flatly. He was once a goal for you to surpass, wasn't he? You're determined, and once you set your sights on something, you'll do everything to surpass it. Perhaps, after we parted ways atop the mountain, I also became one of your targets? I'm not sure if I should feel honored or uneasy. Ling Qingzhu's voice was soft. Lin Langtian severely wounded my father, so there was enmity between us. It's different with you, Lin Dong frowned. Back then, my words wounded your pride. Do you not resent me for that? Ling Qingzhu asked with a slight smile. It was the truth. Without strength, stubborn pride is just a joke. Besides, in your eyes, I probably did seem like a toad lusting after a swan. Lin Dong shrugged. Your words are insincere, but I can sense a hint of bitterness. Ling Qingzhu smiled faintly. I don't care if you hate me or not. Even if I had the chance to go back, I would still say the same thing. Still, I must say, I admire how far you've come in just 5 short years. As Ling Qingzhu spoke, the corners of her lips beneath her veil lifted slightly. Knowing the humble beginnings of the young man before her was precisely why she felt a sense of surprise at his current accomplishments. Otherwise, with her discerning eye, while Lin Dong's current strength wasn't weak, it still wouldn't be enough to truly earn her admiration. Even if he reached that level, she might only acknowledge it with a faint smile. A woman like her was akin to an impenetrable fortress. No matter how much others coveted or employed their charms, in the end, they would only leave disappointed. A woman like this would likely be the most difficult conquest for any man in the world. It's rare to hear you admit to admiring someone. Lin Dong raised his eyebrows as he looked at Ling Qingzhu's veiled yet delicate face, teasing her with a smile. Yet deep inside, a rare feeling of satisfaction surged. Even for someone with his temperament, it was difficult to remain unmoved upon hearing words of praise from someone as proud as Ling Qingzhu. Ling Qingzhu smiled faintly, well aware of the emotions stirring within him. Knowing the young man in front of her, she could tell her compliment was feeding his male pride. However, she gave him no opportunity to dwell on it, meeting his playful teasing with silence. Seeing this, Lin Dong simply smiled and redirected his gaze toward the distorted space ahead. His eyes narrowed slightly as he muttered, "It seems like we've reached our destination." Oh! Ling Qingzhu's expression flickered with surprise. She lifted her gaze and saw shadowy figures standing faintly in the distance through the twisted space. The two quickened their pace, and after several minutes, those shadowy figures came into full view. It was a massive stone altar, ancient in design, exuding an aura of time-worn mystery. Clearly, it had stood there for many years. This is the center of the formation controlling the entire space, Lin Dong softly remarked, his eyes fixed on the stone altar. Ling Qingzhu's gaze also rested on the altar. Her eyes suddenly sharpened as she whispered, "We're not alone." As her words fell, her attention shifted toward another part of the altar. There, faint footsteps could be heard, and soon after, 3 figures slowly emerged, stepping into their line of sight. Enemies truly do cross paths. Lin Dong's expression darkened as he recognized the 3 familiar figures. They were none other than the 3 minor kings from the Yuan sect. At the same time Lin Dong noticed them, the trio also saw him. A look of surprise crossed their faces, followed by cold smirks and sinister glints in their eyes. To them, it was as if Lin Dong had walked straight into their trap. The 3 slowly approached from the other side of the altar, but stopped a short distance from Lin Dong. Yuan Tsang's face remained cold and indifferent. His gaze briefly flickered when he saw Ling Qingzhu standing beside Lin Dong, but when his eyes returned to Lin Dong, they grew even more sinister. Lin Dong, it seems even the heavens aren't on your side. It didn't take long before you were delivered right to us. Little Lei King Lei Qian sneered venomously at Lin Dong. His face was still pale, though it had improved somewhat. Clearly, he had brought potent healing pills with him. Little Ling Qingzhu also fixed his shady gaze on Lin Dong, casually fanning himself with a folding fan, his intent anything but friendly. Lin Dong's expression mirrored their hostility. He hadn't expected to encounter them here, and the situation wasn't ideal for him. If the three minor kings teamed up, it would be extremely difficult for him to fend them off. I have to admit, I'm surprised you managed to find your way here, Yuan Song remarked casually, though he didn't make any immediate moves. His group had arrived first, armed with extensive knowledge about the ancient vault of heaven burning, but Yuan Song hadn't anticipated that Lin Dong would appear here so soon after they did. This must be the central hub that controls the formation in this space, right? Lin Dong shrugged and glanced at the stone altar. As he observed the altar, Lin Dong's eyes narrowed slightly, and he instinctively rubbed his palm. He could feel the stone talisman within him reacting with an unusual fluctuation. This altar. Lin Dong lifted his gaze toward the red-tinted sky above the altar, his eyes flashing as if he had sensed something. Qingzhu, are you all right? Yuan Song's attention shifted to Ling Qingzhu. His face softened into a gentle smile, a smile that, though not as handsome as Ling Zhen's, was still quite charming. It gave him an air of warmth and ease. Ling Qingzhu nodded slightly, her clear eyes flickering briefly toward Lin Dong beside her before she spoke. Brother Yuan Song, do you know exactly where we are? This is the heaven-scorching formation within the ancient vault of heaven burning. It serves as the vault's defense mechanism. Everyone who enters the vault is trapped within this formation. However, the formation hasn't fully activated yet, which is why we've been able to reach this point, Yuan Song explained with a smile. Heaven-scorching formation, Lin Dong's eyes grew more serious. If the formation hadn't fully activated yet, and was already this powerful, what would happen when it did? All those who entered the ancient vault of heaven burning are now trapped in this formation. But don't worry, Qingzhu. Once I control the formation, the disciples of the Nine Heavens Taiching Palace should be unharmed, Yuan Song said, still smiling. Of course, those who don't know their place will likely be reduced to ashes within the heaven-scorching formation, Lei Qian added with a cruel smile. Upon hearing this, Lin Dong's face instantly darkened. His gaze grew cold as he stared at the trio. If any disciples of the Dao sect are harmed, don't expect the Yuan sect disciples to leave the alien demon region alive. Such bold words. Even Zhou Tong wasn't as arrogant as you. Who do you think you are? Ling Zhen sneered coldly, his eyes narrowing. To think you still have the nerve to spout such nonsense. Do you believe you have the strength to act so recklessly? Yuan Song's face twisted into a mocking smile as he stared at Lin Dong. Boss, let's deal with him here and now. It'll save us from any unnecessary trouble, Lei Qian growled, his eyes filled with venomous intent. A cold light flickered in Yuan Song's eyes, and he nodded slightly. Now that Lin Dong had fallen into their hands, it was the perfect opportunity to finish him off once and for all. As Yuan Song gave the signal, killing intent surged in Lei Qian and Ling Zhen's eyes. Without hesitation, they moved into position, forming a half-circle around Lin Dong, clearly intent on launching a joint attack to swiftly eliminate him. Lin Dong watched the unfolding scene, his expression darkening as he circulated all of his primordial energy. With his current strength, dealing with just Lei Qian alone would require a fierce battle. Now that all three minor kings were making a move simultaneously, even with his confidence, he knew this would be far from easy. Yuan Song and the others floated in the air, an overwhelming wave of energy gradually spreading out, the oppressive force enveloping Lin Dong. In response, Lin Dong waved his sleeve, summoning a demon corpse to stand in front of him. At this point, he had no choice but to employ all the means at his disposal. However, just as Lin Dong was preparing to unleash his full strength and engage in a fierce battle with the three minor kings, a faint fragrance wafted from behind him. To his surprise, Ling Qingzhu, who had been standing behind him, lightly stepped forward and stood in front of him. Qingzhu, what is the meaning of this? Yuan Song's expression changed instantly as he spoke in a low voice upon seeing Ling Qingzhu standing before Lin Dong. Brother Yuan Song, I was able to get this far thanks to Lin Dong guiding me. I owe him a favor. So, if you intend to make a move, I'm afraid I can't just stand by and do nothing, Ling Qingzhu said calmly, her veil fluttering slightly. Her serene voice seemed to quell the restless energy surging through the air. Even Lin Dong was momentarily taken aback by her words. He hadn't expected Ling Qingzhu to step forward, and the so-called favor of guiding her didn't hold much weight, especially since, 5 years ago, Lin Dong still owed her a favor. Yuan Tsang's face gradually darkened, a storm of fury brewing in his eyes. Ling Qingzhu's act of stepping forward to protect Lin Dong clearly struck a nerve in him, who had always been indifferent. Ling Zhen and Lei Qian exchanged glances. They both knew that Yuan Tsang had long held feelings for Ling Qingzhu. Although there had been no progress between them over the years, Yuan Tsang had already come to view Ling Qingzhu as his alone. Seeing her now stepping out to shield Lin Dong only fueled his rage. The two exchanged cold smiles. They knew that by stepping forward, Ling Qingzhu had only made Yuan Tsang more determined to kill Lin Dong. Lin Dong, will you continue to hide behind a woman? Yuan Tsang asked coldly, his eyes fixed on Lin Dong. Lin Dong's expression darkened. After a brief pause, he exhaled slowly, took a step forward, and moved past Ling Qingzhu. As Lin Dong walked past her, Ling Qingzhu frowned slightly and said in a cool voice, "The hardships you've endured over the past 5 years should have taught you the importance of survival. A moment of bravado may seem impressive, but to me, it's incredibly short-sighted. I'm afraid I'll have to take back the praise I gave you earlier." Lin Dong paused for a moment, standing still in silence before turning back. He gazed at her face, stunning even with the veil covering it, and smiled. "You've always been curious about how I managed to get this far in 5 years, haven't you? It's simple. I told myself back then that letting a woman save me once is enough. Also, I'm not one to show off. I know how strong the three of them are, but you should also know that I'm no longer the weak boy I was 5 years ago. If they want to kill me, the price they'll have to pay will be more than they can afford." Ling Qingzhu bit her lip lightly as she looked at the smiling young man in front of her. The boy who had once been humble and weak had chosen to endure humiliation when faced with the unbeatable Lin Langtian, a decision that many had ridiculed. But in the end, he proved that those who laugh last, laugh best. Back then, she had spared him not because she saw any shocking potential in him, nor out of pity. The main reason she let him go was because of the resilience he had shown in the face of an opponent he couldn't possibly defeat at the time. She could see Lin Dong's success now, but in his words, she could also sense the countless hardships he had endured over the years. Ling Qingzhu's clear eyes lowered slightly as she suppressed the complex emotions in them. In the end, she simply shook her head and said no more. "A price too high to pay? Are you sure you haven't lost your mind?" Yuan Tsang sneered as he looked down at Lin Dong. However, Lin Dong responded with a calm smile and a nod. His hands clenched tightly within his sleeves, and 2 dim stone beads faintly appeared between his fingers, emitting an indescribable, subtle energy. "I'm sure. Do you want to try and find out?" Lin Dong raised his head, flashing a bright smile at Yuan Tsang and the others. Within that smile, a hint of madness flickered. In front of the giant stone altar, the 4 of them stood off, a chilling tension filling the air. The killing intent in their eyes was unmistakable. "Do you want to try?" Yuan Tsang's eyes darkened further upon hearing Lin Dong's words. He stared intently at Lin Dong, whose face showed no trace of fear, only a rising madness. This madness made Yuan Tsang narrow his eyes. He no longer regarded Lin Dong with the same dismissiveness. Although Lin Dong's strength on the surface seemed inadequate, past experiences had taught them that underestimating him would be a grave mistake. Yuan Tsang didn't know why Lin Dong was still daring to stand his ground at this point, but he had a nagging feeling that Lin Dong wasn't merely bluffing. Lin Dong's audacity suggested he had something to rely on. Perhaps his warning about the high cost wasn't just empty words. Yuan Tsang's gaze flickered. He wasn't indecisive by nature, but knowing Lin Dong's character, he understood that Lin Dong wasn't one to bluff without substance. "Boss." Lei Qian and Ling Zhan were both startled when they saw Yuan Tsang hesitate after Lin Dong's challenge. They hadn't expected him to be swayed by Lin Dong's words. "Boss, no matter how capable this brat is, do you really think he can take on all 3 of us? Don't let him scare you." Lei Qian growled darkly. Ling Zhan remained silent, his eyes flickering as he glanced at Lin Dong. He knew Yuan Song well enough to understand that if he was holding back, there must be something he was wary of. "I'll take control of the formation first," Yuan Song said, retracting his gaze from Lin Dong. Lei Qian was taken aback and was about to speak when Yuan Song shot him a cold glare. "What's the rush? Once we control the formation, how can he possibly escape?" "Lei Qian, let's wait a moment. What boss says is the safest course of action. Afterward, you can deal with him however you want," Ling Zhan added. Fine. Let's let him prance around a little longer," Lei Qian growled, his eyes filled with venom as he glared at Lin Dong. Yuan Song stared coldly at Lin Dong, then floated backward and landed on the giant stone altar. He wasn't one to gamble, and although he didn't fully believe Lin Dong had the means to contend with all three of them, he wasn't willing to take any chances. He chose to temporarily suppress his killing intent, knowing that once he controlled the heaven-scorching formation, Lin Dong would be doomed. No matter what trump cards he had, there would be no escape. As Yuan Song retreated to the altar, Lei Qian and Ling Zhan hovered in midair, their eyes locked on Lin Dong, their bodies radiating powerful primordial energy, clearly ready to prevent Lin Dong from interfering. "So he wants to control the heaven-scorching formation," Lin Dong observed Yuan Song's actions and easily guessed what he was trying to do. However, what was surprising was that Lin Dong's expression remained calm, as if he wasn't worried at all about the danger he would be in once Yuan Song succeeded. "Do you understand the consequences if he controls the formation?" Ling Qingzhu's clear eyes looked toward the altar as she spoke softly. "Once he controls it, the lives of everyone inside the ancient vault of heaven burning will be at his mercy. Even if you have some means of escaping, I'm afraid none of the Dao sect disciples will survive." "I know." Lin Dong smiled. His nonchalant response made Ling Qingzhu frown slightly. "Then why are you so calm?" Controlling the heaven-scorching formation would indeed give him control over everyone's life and death. But the real question is the formation really so easy to control? Lin Dong chuckled softly. "This is the heart of the heaven-scorching formation. Yuan Song and his group must have obtained some information. Are you certain he won't succeed? Are you willing to gamble with the lives of the Dao sect disciples?" Ling Qingzhu asked, her tone still calm. "This is indeed the core of the formation." Lin Dong's lips curled into a faint smile. He then looked up at the crimson sky and murmured, "Just watch. He won't succeed." Ling Qingzhu furrowed her brows but didn't press the issue further. She turned her attention to Yuan Song, who was now on the altar. He continuously shot out beams of powerful primordial energy, which poured into the giant stone altar. Boom, boom. As Yuan Song continued his actions, the massive stone altar began to emit low, rumbling sounds. The stones started to shift and move, releasing waves of dazzling light that spread outward. In the sky, both Ling Zhan and Lei Qian's eyes lit up with excitement. It seemed the information they had obtained wasn't wrong after all. Beams of light shot out from the stone altar, intertwining to form a massive light formation that descended, encasing the altar. However, this scene made Lin Dong's eye twitch, as it didn't seem like the light formation was protecting the altar. Rather, it appeared to be suppressing it. "Something's wrong." Lin Dong took a few steps back, moving closer to Ling Qingzhu, and spoke quietly. Ling Qingzhu's eyes were also filled with caution, as she seemed to have noticed something unusual as well. On the altar, Yuan Song frowned as he looked at the light formation enveloping the altar. After a moment's hesitation, he suddenly struck the ancient stone pillar in the center of the altar with a fierce palm strike. Boom! The stone pillar shattered instantly, and one of the beams of light vanished. At the same time, the light formation dimmed significantly. Boom! As the light formation dimmed, the altar trembled violently. Faint cracks began to spread across the crimson earth surrounding it. "What's happening?" Ling Zhan and Lei Qian exchanged confused glances. This didn't seem like something that should happen after controlling the formation. On the altar, Yuan Song's expression changed slightly. Gritting his teeth, he struck all the remaining stone pillars that emitted beams of light, shattering them one by one. Boom, boom, boom. As the light beams disappeared, the trembling of the altar intensified. Cracks continued to spread across the ground, and from within those cracks, a sinister black mist began to seep out. When Lin Dong saw the black mist, his pupils shrank, and a look of horror crossed his face. He recognized this mist. It was nearly identical to the strange creature that had been sealed beneath the great wilderness monument. Beneath this altar, there were similar unknown creatures being suppressed. Lin Dong took a deep breath, his face pale. Although the presence here wasn't as terrifying as what had been sealed under the great wilderness monument, it was still far beyond what they could handle. What is this? Ling Qingzhu's eyes narrowed as she noticed the black mist seeping from the cracks. We're in big trouble, Lin Dong muttered, his expression dark. He glared up at Yuan Tsang on the altar and shouted, "You fool! You think you're controlling the formation? You're about to release what's been sealed beneath this altar." Ling Zhan and Lei Qian's faces darkened as they looked at the eerie black mist rising from the ground. This definitely didn't seem like the result of controlling the formation. This is none of your concern. Yuan Tsang's gaze turned icy as he glared at Lin Dong. He hesitated for a moment before looking at the last remaining stone pillar, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. In the end, he gritted his teeth and slammed his palm down, shattering the final stone pillar. Crack. With the final light beam gone, the light formation that had been suppressing the altar vanished. At the same time, the trembling of the altar stopped. Seeing the altar cease its movement, Yuan Tsang and the others breathed a sigh of relief. However, just as they exhaled, a violent and chilling energy suddenly surged from beneath the altar and exploded outward. Boom! The stone altar shattered into pieces, sending debris flying in all directions. At the same time, a monstrous black fog erupted from the ground, filling the air with an indescribable evil and coldness. Those bastards! Lin Dong's face darkened as he watched the black fog surge from the ground. He couldn't help but curse under his breath. Those three idiots had just released whatever had been sealed beneath the altar. The black fog spread rapidly, covering the area. An overwhelming sense of evil and coldness accompanied it, making even the air feel oppressive. What is that? Ling Qingzhu's face grew serious as she stared at the spreading black mist. The sinister coldness it carried was unlike anything she had ever encountered before. Even she, with all her strength, couldn't help but feel uneasy. She knew of some cultivation methods that produced similar auras, but the evil emanating from this mist was on an entirely different level. It felt alien, as if it didn't belong to this world, and it seemed intent on eradicating all living things. The culprits behind the ancient war between heaven and earth. It seems they weren't completely eradicated. This thing was sealed here, and now it's managed to break free, Lin Dong said, his voice low and grim. The culprits behind the war, Ling Qingzhu frowned and asked softly, "What do we do now?" Lin Dong let out a bitter laugh. How was he supposed to know what to do? This kind of thing was far beyond what they could handle. What are they trying to do? Lin Dong, wearing a bitter smile, suddenly heard Ling Qingzhu's surprised voice. He quickly raised his head and saw that Yuan Tsang and the other two were approaching the black fog. As they moved closer, a surge of powerful primordial energy erupted from their bodies, transforming into a light screen in the shape of a triangle, which enveloped the black fog. Their intention seemed to be to capture the creature within the black mist. Idiots! Lin Dong's face drastically changed at this sight. Without hesitation, he grabbed Ling Qingzhu's delicate wrist and swiftly retreated. As Lin Dong and Ling Qingzhu retreated, the triangular light screen slammed heavily into the black fog. Kakik, you lowly ants dare to challenge me? Truly pathetic creatures. From the swirling black fog came an ear-piercing, sinister laughter. The black fog surged, and the light screens filled with primordial energy disintegrated upon contact, vanishing instantly without offering any resistance. Yuan Tsang and his companions, shocked that their attack had no effect, immediately pulled back in retreat. Shoo! As they tried to escape, a massive hand formed from the black fog shot toward the three of them. Boom! Boom! The trio quickly unleashed their vast primordial energy in defense, but as soon as their attacks touched the black fog hand, they were eroded and dissolved, leaving them completely ineffective. From a distance, Lin Dong watched coldly as Yuan Song and his companions were forced into a miserable retreat under the creature's assault. The trouble they had stirred up was entirely their own doing. "Let go of me." A soft, calm voice suddenly reached Lin Dong's ears. Only then did he realize that he was still tightly gripping Ling Qingzhu's wrist. He quickly coughed and let go, releasing her. "That creature looks difficult to deal with," Ling Qingzhu said, lightly rubbing her wrist where Lin Dong had grabbed it. Her tone was still cool, but there was a slight tremor in her voice, and she avoided looking at Lin Dong. Lin Dong nodded slightly, his brows furrowing in thought. While it was satisfying to see Yuan Song and his companions in such a predicament, he knew that once that black fog creature recovered, it wouldn't spare anyone, including them. With their current strength, they had no hope of stopping it. As Lin Dong pondered the situation, his gaze suddenly sharpened, and he looked up toward the crimson sky, where an intense wave of energy had suddenly emerged. Noticing Lin Dong's reaction, Ling Qingzhu also raised her head to look at the crimson sky and said softly, "Something's happening up there, Dong." Just as her voice fell, a deep and resonant bell chime echoed from the crimson sky above. As the bell rang, a crimson ripple spread rapidly across the sky. As the ripple swept across the space, Lin Dong noticed that the distortion in the space around them began to fade. Furthermore, he realized that numerous auras, both weak and strong, suddenly appeared all around them. "The formation seems to have been lifted," Ling Qingzhu observed. She had clearly sensed the appearance of those auras as well, likely belonging to others who had entered the ancient vault of heaven burning. Lin Dong nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the sky. The space there continued to ripple and distort until, faintly, a massive, indescribable furnace cauldron seemed to take shape, and they appeared to be inside it. "It looks like we weren't trapped in the heaven-scorching formation at all. We've been inside this thing all along," Lin Dong said, pointing to the colossal furnace emerging from the distorted space. He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with shock. The ancient vault of heaven burning they had entered was actually a furnace cauldron. "This must be an incredibly powerful pure primordial treasure," Ling Qingzhu remarked, her gaze serious as she looked at the furnace's walls. Lin Dong's expression grew more focused. He had seen powerful treasures before, like Huanhuan's Sky Phoenix Zither, but this furnace cauldron, which could swallow them into a space of its own, was clearly far more formidable. It was likely one of the finest pure primordial treasures. Dong. At that moment, the furnace cauldron, which enveloped the entire space, erupted with waves of crimson light. The light surged downward, heading directly toward where they stood. As the crimson light descended, it formed an immense light formation in the sky, which then swept downward, trapping the black fog creature inside. Boom, boom, boom. The black fog crashed against the light formation, but this time, it couldn't break through as easily as before. Still, the sheer force of its attacks caused the light formation to tremble violently. "That furnace cauldron. It seems someone is controlling it?" Lin Dong asked in surprise as he observed the scene. Ling Qingzhu nodded slightly, her eyes filled with astonishment. Even someone as composed as she was struggling to maintain her calm amidst this series of extraordinary events. "Damn you, heaven-burning ghost. Even in death, you won't rest." The black fog creature roared as it slammed into the light formation, its shrill voice reverberating through the sky. "That light formation won't hold for long," Lin Dong muttered, his heart racing as he watched the formation shake under the black fog creature's assault. Now that the formation had been broken, if the creature managed to break free, countless people would surely perish. Buzz, buzz. Just as Lin Dong's worry deepened, a crimson wave suddenly rippled through the air. As the wave spread, Lin Dong felt an immense force of rejection from the surrounding space. The space behind him twisted, and he realized it was trying to pull him in. What's going on? Ling Qingzhu furrowed her brows as the space behind her also began to distort. Lin Dong's eyes flickered as he quickly said, "Don't resist. It seems this furnace is trying to spit us out." With that, Lin Dong ceased all resistance, allowing the spatial force to push him into the twisted space behind him. His vision quickly plunged into darkness. The darkness didn't last long. Soon, Lin Dong felt a crimson light shine into his eyes. His vision cleared, revealing that they were no longer on the Crimson Earth. Instead, they stood in the midst of crimson mountain ranges, and high above them, a colossal furnace cauldron, hundreds of meters tall, floated quietly in the air, emitting waves of scorching heat. Lin Dong gazed at the massive furnace suspended between heaven and earth and exhaled deeply. He realized that the place where they had been trapped earlier was indeed inside the belly of this furnace cauldron.